Hello, MrShine here from HearthstonePlayers.com. I'm bringing you another episode of my Goblins vs. Gnomes new card spotlight. And I think this one is a doozy. It's huge. We just got out of a whole bunch of new cards that got released, Goblins vs. Gnomes. I'm super excited, and it turns out that the game is going to come out on the 8th, so it's like a week away now. And boy, oh boy, it's going to be very intense because there's so many new synergies, so many new ideas, some very cool concepts that are coming out. I'm very excited. This is actually going to be taking the place of my normal Wednesday arena quiz video. I was going to wrap up my Paladin quiz video, and I'm almost there. I'll get there, I promise. I think this is a little more pressing as far as time is concerned. So we're going to go here. This will probably be broken up into a few different segments because there's like over 50 cards. I don't know if I even have the voice to talk through all 50 cards by the time this video is said and done. So buckle up, grab some popcorn, and I'm going to discuss as many of these as I can, and then we'll take a break after that. So I'm going to start with some of the neutral minions. I'm going to start basically in terms of rarity, and then I'm going to move into the other classes and discuss my thoughts there. So the first one to kick us off is the Ship's Cannon, a 2-mana, 2/3 neutral card. Whenever you summon a pirate, deal 2 damage to a random enemy. Now that actually seems like a fairly decent card. Of course, it's a card that requires you to have pirate synergy if you want to get a lot of value from the card. However, as a 2/3 kind of vanilla 2-drop, it's not necessarily awful either. But I think that most likely, especially in Constructed, you're going to see this combined with other sort of pirate decks. Now if you can make it land and deal 2 damage to a random enemy, this can really be huge in an early game for your deck, because you can potentially coin this out on turn 1, then you can follow up with a pirate to the next turn, deal 2 damage to a random enemy, which is, well, it could be face, but it could also be their 3/2, and then you can immediately get some value and set up a lot more tempo as the game goes on. You could also potentially do some sort of combo where you drop the cannon and then immediately unleash some of the pirates, haha, you know, and all that sort of stuff, and maybe get a little extra damage. I don't think this card is going to be played too much in Constructed though, just because I don't think that pirate decks are really yet a thing. There are a few new pirates that came out in this expansion I've noticed, but I don't think there's enough that are good enough to warrant a full-on pirate deck that's going to be really competitive. Having said that, I think Ship's Cannon goes a long way to set up that early tempo, and it's possible that there is some potential for it. I think if a pirate deck is going to be around, it is probably going to be a rogue deck, maybe a warrior deck, but I think most likely it fits the rogue archetype a little bit better for setting up the early tempo and moving that way. So I think this card, I would give it, I think, a 3 out of 5 stars. Nah, I would even go, yeah, let's go 3 out of 5 stars. I think it has potential to be even stronger than that, but I think the likelihood of you getting, actually getting a deck that's going to work with it is not that great. Next one is Puddle Stomper, a 2-mana 3/2 Murloc. And that's all it is, a 3/2 Murloc for 2. So nothing very fancy, but it does allow a little bit more as far as Murloc synergy goes. I would say this is worse than the Ship's Cannon, even though it is a 3/2 instead of a 2/3, which is typically better, but it is still not going to see much play. I would pick this still in the arena since it's the standard 3/2. I can't really complain, but the Murloc synergy, it's okay. I give it, again, a 3 out of 5 stars, but more on the lower end of 3 instead of the upper end of 3, like Ship's Cannon is. Next one, a 2/3, the Goblin? Yeah, it's a goblin with gills, I think. The Goblin Stalker, a 2/3 for stealth for 2 mana. So actually, I think this card is fairly strong. I think the fact that it has stealth means that you get to choose the person that you want to attack. It can't be removed by spells until you decide to reveal it, and you could potentially let it sit around for a while and then you can buff it later, or you can just use it as a standard 2/3 for 2, which is not that bad. I think this card will see play in the arena. I think it's actually quite a strong 2-drop because of that flexibility that you can choose when you want to attack. So you can almost always get some sort of value out of this card. However, I don't know if it's really going to see much Constructed play. It doesn't have any sort of mech or Murloc or pirate or anything like that, any synergies, other than the fact it's a 2/3 for stealth. So I doubt it's going to be in Constructed, although there could be some sort of decks that could be combining it for some burst damage at a later point, who knows. I would give this card, though, a 4 out of 5 stars, just because of the value that it represents, especially from an arena perspective. Another very strong 2-drop, the Stone Splinter Trog, a 2/3 for 2 that is kind of like a mini Burly Rockjaw Trog, in that whenever your opponent casts a spell, it gets +1 attack. So this card, if the opponent casts any sort of spell, it becomes a 3/3 for 2, which is quite good. It's above the curve. It's going to kill other 2 3-drops. It will trade evenly with other 3 2-drops, so it's not going to be anything insane, but I think that this does represent a lot of potential. I would give this card a 4 out of 5 stars as well. I'm again thinking of Arena mostly. I think it's going to be valuable in the Arena. I think that it probably won't see much play in Constructed, but that doesn't mean that the card itself is bad. It's just that I don't think it's going to be something that's going to be insane. I think it's still a solid card. So 4 out of 5. I think 4 out of 5 is a very good early game minion. Another very good early game minion is the Ogre Brute, a 3 mana 4/4, but it does have the Ogre symptom, which means it's going to attack a random enemy 50% of the time. So it'll be swinging wildly, you don't really know what it's going to hit, but that's okay, because a 3 mana 4/4 is much more in the early game, and it's going to trade very well with a other 2-drop, another 3-drop probably. It has a chance to miss, but your opponent will need to deal with it. It's a 4/4 body in the early game, which I think is quite strong. I give this card actually a 4 out of 5 stars. I think that it does have the potential to be bad, but it is a lot of stats in the early game. Again, I think the issue is for Ninja Ogre and some of the other ones, they just cost more mana, so you put a lot more investment into that card and you hope you get a good deal and hope it does not miss the target you want it to hit. But this card, you can kind of throw it down and it's okay. Even if it runs in the face for 4 damage, they're going to eventually remove it anyways. Okay, 3 mana Gnomes Infantry, a 1/4 with Charge and Taunt. Nah, not really a big fan with this card, I guess. The fact that it has Charge is nice. It's certainly better than a Silverback Patriarch. Even though a Silverback Patriarch is a beast, it's a terrible beast, let's be honest. The Charge is at least giving the Gnomes Infantrymen a chance to make a trade with a 1 HP minion, do a little bit of a ping, and then it has a taunt afterwards, so it's a little bit of a pain to get around if your opponent wants to get through the taunt. It is going to have an awesome charge sound, I imagine. I mean, who can begrudge a little Gnomes Infantryman for Gnomes run in, pop you for 1 damage, then that's nothing. But it's still bad. I think it's still I would say a 2 out of 5 stars sort of card. I don't really see it getting much play. With the exception of maybe Hobgoblin, but I'll get to that a little bit later. Another 3 mana 1/4 is the Flying Machine. It has Wind Fury, so it is again a Silverback Patriarch with Wind Fury. Not only can you hit someone for 1 damage once, you can hit someone for 1 damage twice. Of course, this does lend itself to being buffed. I think a 1/4 is, well, when you think about the Thrallmar Farseer, which is a 2/3 Wind Fury, it has more attack, so that Wind Fury goes a longer way. Flying Machine 1/4. Yeah, I think it's even worse, actually. It still can be buffed, and that's fine, but it does have a mech synergy, so that is one thing going for it, but I still think this card is actually quite bad. I can't see it really being picked in the arena. I guess the only thing I could see it is in a Shaman mech bursty deck where you could have Flame Tongue Totems and try to get some cheap mechs out there and then buff them with Flame Tongue Totem. But otherwise, yeah, 2 out of 5 stars, and that's kind of pushing it. I think it's just not going to be a pick for many decks. Mechanical Yeti. 4 mana, 4/5. It's a mech, so it's a Yeti that is mechanical. And it also has a death rattle that gives each player a spare part. RIP Yeti! Yeti, you are so good, but Mechanical Yeti is so much better. It has synergy with mechs, and that death rattle means it can buff other things that, like Undertaker for example, and the fact that it gives each player a spare part is just kind of a wash, I guess. I mean, you do give your opponent something, but you get something in return, and I think that spare parts aren't going to be super game-changing as time goes on. It's going to have an occasional bit of synergy. But I think this card is just simply better, and I think it's also amazing. I think it's going to certainly be a top arena pick card, just like Yeti is, but it's better, as I said before. And I think that it's a card that is going to see its way in other mech decks, because a 4 mana 4/5 is exactly what you want to see on curve. I think this card is a 5 out of 5 card. I think it's a very good mid-range card, and I think it will see a lot of play in many decks. We have a new beast, a 4 mana 5/4, the Lost Tall Strider. It is a 5/4 beast. That's about it. But it's okay. It's still not bad. 5 attack is actually quite good to trade with things like Sludge Belcher. There's a lot of decent minions that have 5 HP. It does not have the downside that Ancient Brewmaster has. Well, Ancient Brewmaster can be an upside with the battle cry that summons one of your minions, brings it back into your hand. Tall Strider doesn't do any of that. It's just like, hey, I'm a beast, so you can use me in a Druid deck, you can use me in a Hunter deck, and I'm a 5/4. I'll trade with stuff. It's all good. I give this card, actually, I think it is a decent mid-range minion. It will see play in the arena. It might see play in Constructed, although it's harder to say with what the Beast Synergy is going to look like. I will still give it a 4 out of 5 stars, though. I think that, well, yeah, let's go 4 out of 5 stars. I think it's a solid mid-range minion. Alright, we have a new pirate, a 5-mana salty dog. Yar, it's a 7/4 pirate, and that's all it is. And I think this card is actually quite bad. I think it is kind of like a Ventricle Mercenary without the downside, but also with 2 less HP, which is a big deal. A 4 HP minion is much easier to remove than a 6 HP minion or a 5 HP minion. So for 5 mana, it's quite an investment. It's basically a Stalag, and Stalag doesn't see much play right now, and it's a pirate, so it has that synergy, but I don't think any sort of pirate decks will really play mid to late game minions like this. I think they're going to be more fast paced. So I think the Salty Dog, while cute, is still bad, and I think it's going to get a 2 out of 5 stars. I don't think it'll see much in Arena or Constructed. Now we're moving on to an 8 mana neutral mech called the Force Tank Max. It is a 7/7 mech with Divine Shield. This card is going to certainly be a hero in the Arena. It's a big minion. It is certainly better than a War Golem, a 7 mana 7/7, because that Divine Shield means that at least something else is going to need to be done to hit it. If you don't have a pinging ability like the Mage, you're either going to take 7 damage with your hero ability to just run into it, or you're going to have to at least run one other minion into it. So it's probably going to go 2 for 1 at the very least, and it has a good potential to do even more. I think it's a little too slow for many mech decks in Constructed. I don't think it's going to see that much play there, but again, in Arena, I think it's just a solid, beefy minion, and I would give it a 4 out of 5 stars simply for the fact that it is a solid card, but I think it's, yeah, it just won't really see much play otherwise. I think in terms of Constructed, it'll probably be like a 3 or 2 out of 5 star card. Okay, we are now moving on to rare neutral cards from the expansion that just came out recently. First one is the Target Dummy, a 0 mana, 0/2 taunt. So step aside, Wisp, you have met your match. This card also has a mech-based synergy because it is a mech, so it is actually something that I think could see play in Constructed. If you are making a zoo-type deck, kind of like how the Shield Bearer worked before, or the Void Walker, where you throw something cheap down to protect your other minions. This also has, again, mech synergy, so you can potentially buff it, or help combine it with some other sorts of combos. I don't see this card being played in the Arena because I think it's trash as far as stats are concerned, but I think there's a lot of potential, and I'm going to go with a 3 out of 5 stars for this card just because I think there's going to be a lot of ways to combine it with other things and get some good value out of it. Next up, we are moving to the Arcane Nullifier X21, a 4 mana 2/5 mech. It has Taunt and it cannot be targeted by spells or hero powers. So again, we're seeing another sort of Fairy Dragon Spectral Knight situation here. I think that this card is going to be very difficult for people to remove, and that's going to be annoying. I think that it is a card that, the downside of course is it's a 2/5, so 2/5 is much worse than a 3/5. It's not going to even trade with all early drops, and I think there's a lot more 2/3s in the early game now but with this expansion, so it may not even kill an early drop 2/3. And with that said, I think that while the ability of not being able to target by spells or hero powers is good, it'll kind of act as a wall that won't really have that much value as far as trading is concerned. The one thing that it does have going for it, it will just be a pain for people to get through. It will protect early game, and there is a chance that you could have a deck that is a bunch of micro machines, a lot. You just kind of flood the board with mechs, and then you have this to get in the way, and it makes it very difficult for people to get around it to try to use their board to clear your minions. I suppose it's also true that you could play this card right before Mimiron's Head if you have a deck that's trying to get that Mega Wind Fury out. And again, because it is that taunt and because it can't be removed very easily, it can give your Mimiron's Head a better chance to summon Voltron. So again, there is synergy potential. I think that in a deck that is based on an early zoo, I guess it does have the potential kind of like Target Dummy. But as far as Arena is concerned, not so great. Alright, here we go. A tech card called the Kazan Mystic, a 4 mana 4/3, whose battle cry is take control of a random enemy secret. This card is going to certainly be used in the current meta if it could, by stealing secrets from mages or stealing secrets from hunters, certainly hunters. It was been confirmed by Ben Brode that the battle cry takes the secret before anything can trigger. So for example, if your opponent has a snipe secret, you play the Mystic, it steals the snipe, and it does not proc it. So you have a snipe, yay! Of course, this means that your opponent knows that it's a secret, so they can play around the secret that they summoned much easier than you could. But it still is clear value, especially if they played it out of their hand without using a Mad Scientist. Just being able to immediately take a card, steal it from your opponent, and give it to yourself, and of course also pretty much affect the board because they don't have that secret in play, is huge. I think this card, if the meta continues to be secret based, this card will be in many decks. I will go so far as to say it's a 4 out of 5 stars card for now, as far as constructed and things like that are concerned. I think it won't see as much value in the arena because a 4/3 for 4 is not particularly fancy and there aren't as many secrets in the arena, but I think it's a card that when it hits big and it can do quite a bit of work for you. Okay, we're moving into the epic neutral cards now. We have Hobgoblin, a 3 mana 2/3. That of course is bad, but the stats, the ability is that whenever you play a 1 attack minion, give it +2/+2. So if you have any 1 attack minion that comes out, you effectively get 4 or 5 worth of stats for a 3 mana minion, which is huge. The downside, of course, for Hobgoblin is that if you have a lot of 1 attack minions in your deck, they aren't very good without Hobgoblin, and that's kind of a big deal. I don't think this card is going to see much play in the arena because I don't think there are many 1 attack minions that you'd ever want to pick, but I do think this card has strong constructed potential. Thinking of things like Muster for Battle, for example, I assume when you play a 1 attack minion, or when you summon Muster for Battle, you summon those 3 Silverhand Recruits. I assume because it is a spell, you get 3 3/3s, which would be very strong, a ton of stats, and you could play that, of course, on turn 6. But even then, I suppose, you know, it's 9. Oh man, it's like 11, 12 worth of stats for 6 mana and 2 cards. That's a lot of mana and a lot of cards of value there you can gain from it. I don't think it happens when you summon a Silverhand Recruit, though, just from your hero ability, because I don't think you're actually playing a minion. But it's hard to say exactly what cards are going to work for this and what aren't. For example, there's Implosion, which is a new card which I'll get to in a second, but I'll just let you know now. It deals damage and it summons between 2 and 4 1/1 imps. It's a Warlock card, so I assume Hobgoblin may combine with those and make those imps 3/3s, which is really strong. If it works for Unleash the Hounds, for example, you could play it on turn 6, you can play a Hobgoblin, and then you can play Unleash the Hounds and get however many Hounds that are 3/3s with charge. That's real strong if that works, and that would be an amazing combo. Again, I'm not sure if that counts as playing a 1 attack minion or not. It's going to, maybe Ben Brode has already confirmed it and I've missed it, but I think that there is a lot of huge potential with Hobgoblin with synergy-based decks in constructed. Outside of that, though, I think that it does have potential just because there are a lot of minions, some cheap minions that cost 1 mana, like for example a Voidwalker, which is a 1/3 for 1. If you on turn 4 play a Hobgoblin and then play a Voidwalker, play 2 of those cards out of your hand, you still get a lot of stat value from that. Just 1 hit from Hobgoblin is good. You get a 3/5 taunt and a Hobgoblin 2/3 on turn 4. Again, that's a Sen'jin and the Hobgoblin thrown into the mix. And Wisp! I totally forgot about Wisp! The value from Wisp! A 1/1 for no mana that becomes a 3/3! Oh my goodness, that's insanity. I also heard that someone was talking about a 1-hit wonder, 1-turn kill deck for Warrior that could use Hobgoblins. The idea is using a Warsong Commander, and then giving, of course, things that have 2 or less attack buffs with charge. Then you can play a Hobgoblin, then you can play 2 Wisps in your hand that become 3/3s, then you can play Angry Chickens, you can play Inner Rage. You can do a lot of things to get a lot of cheap minions out quickly that get buffed by Hobgoblin and have charge. So you can do a ton of damage with this card if you have a bunch of synergies set up. So again, I actually give this card, well, because I don't know if playing 1 attack minions like Unleash the Hounds is going to work. I'm going to assume it does, and if it does, I will give it a 5 out of 5 in terms of constructed value because this card can be crushing. If it does not always work for spells, though, I would give it then a 4 out of 5, but I do think it has a lot of potential. So look out for this card. I think it may be in many early game decks or kind of combo bursty decks with board. We're moving on to another neutral, a 4 mana Mini Mage. It's a 4/1, so that's usually bad, but it has stealth. It also has spell damage +1. So I think this card is, at first glance, looks awful because the stats are very bad. But when you think about the fact that it has stealth, it has 4 attack, so it's going to trade into something else. Most likely will kill a similar type quality value minion. At the 4 attack, it of course will die in the attempt, but the fact it has spell damage and stealth means you can sit it around and you can buff other spells, and then when you decide you want to attack with it, then you can, but not before that point. So I actually think this card is better than many people may have been expecting. I think this is not a card that is going to see much arena play. I think it could be a card that could certainly be in constructed if you have a burst type deck, because that spell damage is useful and you can have it sit around for a while, and then, you know, of course that 4 damage is an impact at a later point when you want to use it. I still give this card, I think, a 3 out of 5, and it could see more play in constructed if there's some decks that can be built around it. I'm thinking maybe decks that don't have that much in the way of minions, just have a lot of burst with spells, that they're not really going to feel that bad if someone uses a sweeper to clear the mini-mage because there aren't many other cards on the board, so they pretty much 1-for-1 anyways, and of course you get that spell damage the whole time. Alright, moving on to Junkbot, a 5-mana 1/5. Whenever a friendly mech dies, gain +2/+2. So this card is kind of like a Scavenging Hyena, except instead of for beasts and a 2-mana 2/2, it's a mech that costs much more mana. And I think the fact it costs much more mana means it is actually quite worse. Even though it has the +2/+2, you need to have at least 2 mechs die before I think it really gets any sort of really solid value. I mean, the idea is that I think on turn 5 when you have a board of mechs, you play it and then you at least trade 1 mech, it becomes a 3/7, which is on curve, but again a 3/7 is not the greatest stat allocation. Of course, if you can get 2 mechs killed, it becomes a 5/9, which is quite good for 5 mana, and it has the potential to do even more if you have other sorts of mechs in the board. So I still think though the fact it costs 5 mana means it's probably going to be too slow for many constructed mech decks, which are going to focus on getting the board right away and getting a lot of minions out and overwhelming the opponent. So I don't think by the time you have the Junkbot you're really going to want to trade your board in just to get it buffed, and of course it can be silenced and it is dependent on other sort of mechs dying. I think this card is quite bad in the arena. I think this card is not particularly great in constructed either. I will give it a 2 out of 5 stars, but it has the potential to have some sort of massive whopping minion on the board at some points too. I just think it's too unpredictable. Now boy, talk about a card that is all in. Fel Reaver is a mech. It's a 5-mana 8/8. So of course, your alarm bells have to be going off by now, right? A 5-mana 8/8 is insane. It's basically like a handlock mountain giant, or similarly to that fact when you can ramp the threat out. But of course, the reason it is that cheap is because whenever your opponent plays a card, you discard the top 3 cards of your deck. If you are playing Miracle Rogue, you should never play Fel Reaper because you will go into fatigue immediately. But I think this card is still actually quite strong. A very cheap 8/8. It's an all-in play, but if you have an 8/8 on turn 5, you can really end the game quite early. It also has the potential for you to silence it, and of course you negate that discard potential, so that becomes a super strong card there. I also think the fact it is a mech means that opponents can get it out fairly cheap, and the fact that they will also probably be having a deck that is more fast-paced to try to end the game early if you're thinking about constructed. Whereas with Junkbot, I think that it was too slow. I think Fel Reaver is just the right amount. It is at turn 5, if you already had a board, you drop this, you're not expecting to have the game last many turns more than this, and you're just going to go face with that 8/8 and dare your opponent to have to clear it, and they certainly will have to clear it if they want to survive. I give this card a 4 out of 5 stars, and I think in the arena it's going to be a top pick, even though it is that potential to burn a lot of cards. I think it is still so good as far as stats are concerned that it is still worth picking regardless. Of course, it's epic, so it's not going to come up in the arena much anyways. Okay, and now we are moving on to the legendary neutral cards that have just recently been released. We have Hemet Nesendwari, the 5-mana battle cry, destroy 1 beast, 6/3. So this card is kind of like a Black Knight that instead of destroying taunts, it destroys beasts. However, it also has poorer stats because it's a 6/3 and I would much rather have a 4/5. So, you know, it's going to be a niche card. It's not a card that I would be playing much in the arena because of the stats. It's not, however, a card that I think is going to go away, especially considering that hunters are still around right now, and it has the potential to destroy some huge beasts for very cheap. It's kind of like the swing that a big game hunter has. If you are playing the right deck, it can be crippling, but I don't think that it's a card that is going to see that much play. I would give it 3 out of 5 stars. I think that it is, again, it has a huge effect, but it's going to be so rare, and it's going to be situational that could be used in control decks or anti-hunter decks, and that's about it. Next up we have Gazlo, the 6-mana goblin, a 3/6. The stats are bad, but whenever you cast a 1-mana spell, you add a random mech to your hand. That means that this card can give you quite a bit of card advantage. It basically cycles cards, kind of like the Gadgetzan Auctioneer, except it gives you mechs. So it would be a card that you would certainly play in a mech-based deck, probably in a bursty mech-based deck. Probably in a Shaman mech-based deck, because there's a lot of 1-mana spells that Shaman has at their disposal, is my thought. It's not a card you probably want to play on turn 6, because you probably want to get at least 1 random mech to your hand based on Gazlo's ability, but it has potential. It is a little bit too late, I think, in most cases. I will say though, spare parts. Spare parts are a great way for Gazlo to trade in a spare part for a random mech in your hand. You could have quite a bit of impact if you have more of a control-based mid-range deck and you need to fill things up a little bit later and still get more mech synergy. I would give this card, as far as the arena is concerned, a pretty poor grade. As far as constructed is concerned, maybe a 3 out of 5. I think that it has potential, but again, it's kind of it has a gimmick potential, but it's not something that is going to out and out win the game unless it's later in the game when you can cast it on turn 10 and like a bunch of cards from spare parts can immediately give you more mechs. Alright, this next one is insane. Mogor the Ogre, a 6 mana 7/6. All minions have a 50% chance to attack the wrong enemy. What is going on? This is a hilarious card. I don't think it's a very good card, but it's hilarious. First of all, it's just going to be a bunch of minions running everywhere and you don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be pure chaos. The nice side, though, is that it's going to be very hard for someone to remove Mogor the Ogre unless they have a removal spell in their hand they want to cast on him. Because if they try to trade things into Mogor the Ogre, they might not hit him. Yeah, this is a very RNG card, and I think it's very funny, but I don't think it's going to see really any constructed play. In the arena, it's just like you throw a coin. You're like, alright, well, now we're at turn 6, and we'll see what happens and who wins. It's similar to a brawl, a much more slow-paced brawl. Not everything happens in one turn. People are slowly beating each other, and then we go. I give this card a 2 out of 5 stars. I just think it's not very good because you can't really play that much around it, with the exception of the fact that it makes Mogor the Ogre difficult to remove from your opponent. So there is some potential, I just don't think there's enough potential to really play this card. Here's a card that I will certainly play. Trogzor the Earthinator. 7 mana, 6/6. Whenever your opponent casts a spell, summon a burly Rockjaw Trog, which again is the 4 mana 3/5 that whenever your opponent casts a spell, it gets +2 attack. Wow-wa-wee-wa! That's a lot! It's basically a Loatheb for a little bit more mana that has a much more severe downside for the opponent to cast. Loatheb shuts down spellcasting, but Trogzor is basically like, are you sure you want to spellcast? Are you sure you want to give me a 3/5? And it's a 6/6, so it's a little bit more difficult to remove, even though it is 7 mana, so it's a bit harder to cast in a game, and it could be cleared at a later point if the opponent has board. But if the opponent does not have board, it's huge. And I think this card is just huge in general. I think it's going to see a lot of arena play. I would certainly pick it, even though it is a legendary. It's hard to get to. I think it will definitely see a lot of constructed play too. I think it's going to be a disincentive for people to play spells. I think it's a card that when combined with Loatheb will just shut down certain types of decks and force them into trying to trade with their board, and maybe that deck is not designed for that. So then you have a 6/6 running rampant unless they want to use a fireball or something to kill this, and then you still get a 3/5 out of the deal, which becomes 9/11 worth of stats for 7 mana. So that's just for one spell cast that your opponent has, and of course if they cast more than that, it just gets out of this world. I give it a 5 out of 5. I think it's a great card, even though it is expensive. I think it's going to see a lot of play and really throw things for a loop. Alright, well that is all the new neutral cards that we've heard. I think that might be all of them, all the new ones that we have. I think that because it's coming out on the 8th, that everything has been revealed, and I think I am quite excited. Those neutrals look really awesome. So I think I'm going to continue again very shortly, and in a future video as well, talking about some of the other class cards that are new, and trying to discuss those and give you my thoughts on those cards as well. So stay tuned for that. I've been MrShine. I'll see you next time.